Still the hope, although I think that hope has diminished a lot, of a larger deal. We could, though, be, unfortunately, and I'm not predicting this, but I think there's a risk that we're entering a period that you might consider the political equivalent of divorce court, where there are very short-term increases in the debt ceiling for relatively brief periods, or in the funding of government for brief periods, and each time the two sides come together and relitigate and renegotiate who gets what. And we could be dealing with that for the next year to year and a half. Again, not a prediction, but I do think that's a worst-case potential scenario that we have going forward. So why is this happening? Why are we dealing with the political equivalent of divorce court? Why are we facing this challenge, given that we all thought the election would resolve the issue? Why is it that the two sides have such a hard time coming together? I would argue the reason is that both sides legitimately think they had a mandate, and they won a mandate in the last election. In some ways, if you think about it, we are one country with two electorates. So to put it in perspective, let's look back and think about history. In 1980, when President Reagan was elected first, in 1984 when he was reelected, there was a lot of discussion of Reagan Democrats. You all remember Reagan Democrats. There were a lot of them here in North Florida. People that were lifelong Democrats who had voted for President Reagan. President Reagan famously one of the ways he got his legislation passed is he would bring in all the Democratic elected officials who he had won their state as a senator or their congressional district as a congressman, and he'd bring them in for a drink, and he'd tell them how much he liked them, and he said, I sure hope you will support this bill because I'd hate to have to campaign in your district that I won by 27 points on behalf of why you should. So there were a lot of places where President Reagan's support overlapped with the support of Democrats. President Clinton did significantly improve the Democratic performance in a lot of suburban districts outside of places like Philadelphia and Detroit and Cleveland and Columbus. And so he also had a big overlap. I remember when I worked for President Bush, and it was 2001 and 2002, and we were working very hard to get our own tax bill done. President Bush went to the states, and they were red states that he had won, of people he was trying to get to support his tax bill, and he did rallies about why the taxes were important, and he'd invite the Democratic elected official to come. Most of them voted the right way, from our perspective. And the challenge today is that while in 2008, President Obama won a lot of those red districts, his reelection, which was historic and significant and very impressive, he relied a lot more on strong and deep support in the blue parts of the country at the same time that redistricting made those red districts even redder. So consider the following. Just 15 out of 233, there are 233 Republican districts, right, in the U.S. Congress. Just 15 of those were districts Obama carried. Only 15 out of 233. In 2014, and one other interesting statistic that is related to that, in 2014, there are 14 Republican senators running for re-election. Guess how many of those 14 are from states that President Obama won? One. Just one. And in 12 of the 14, President Obama lost them by 10 points or more. So his ability to do what President Reagan did, or President Clinton did, or even President Bush did, is a lot harder.